On the night of January 26, 1700, the ground along an 1,100-kilometer stretch of the Pacific Ocean floor shifted. A section of tectonic crust roughly the size of California lurched upward by several meters in a matter of minutes. The shaking lasted between 3 and 5 minutes. The tsunami it generated crossed the entire Pacific Ocean in under 10 hours. Japanese coastal communities on the island of Honshu and in Hokkaido recorded waves arriving at their shores without warning, without any locally felt earthquake to explain them. Japanese administrators of the period documented the damage and gave the event a name, the orphan tsunami. They knew it had a parent somewhere. They could not find it. 296 years later, American and Japanese scientists matched the timing of those Japanese records to a specific moment on the Pacific coast of North America. The orphan tsunami had been produced by a magnitude 9.0 earthquake, the full rupture of a 1,300-kilometer fault system called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. The date of that rupture was precisely January 26, 1700. The clock has been running for 326 years. 7 million people currently live in the direct impact zone of the next Cascadia earthquake, and FEMA's own regional director for the Pacific Northwest, when asked publicly what would happen when it ruptures again, said, "Everything west of Interstate 5 will be toast." The Cascadia Subduction Zone runs from Cape Mendocino in Northern California northward through Oregon and Washington to the Brooks Peninsula on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. It is the boundary where a tectonic plate called the Juan de Fuca, a remnant of a much larger oceanic plate that has been slowly consumed over millions of years, is diving beneath the edge of the North American continent at approximately 4 centimeters per year. That motion is continuous, relentless, and in the zone where the two plates are in contact, it is currently locked. The two plates are grinding against each other without slipping. The energy of that grinding is being stored. It has been stored since January 26, 1700. Most people understand earthquake risk through California and the San Andreas fault. The San Andreas is famous, well-studied, and genuinely dangerous, but it is a strike-slip fault. It moves horizontally, one plate sliding past another, and its maximum probable earthquake is generally estimated at around magnitude 8.0 to 8.3. Cascadia is a different category of fault entirely. It is a subduction zone, the same class of geological structure that produced the 2011 Tohoku earthquake that killed nearly 20,000 people and triggered the Fukushima nuclear crisis. Subduction zones can produce earthquakes that strike-slip faults cannot, and when they do, the shaking is not the only threat. The geological record along the Pacific Northwest coast carries an unambiguous history of what Cascadia does when it ruptures. Along the shores of Willapa Bay in southwestern Washington, a stand of dead trees rises from the tidal flats. These ghost forests, red cedar and Sitka spruce, were killed when the land they were rooted in suddenly dropped between 1 and 3 meters at the moment of the 1700 earthquake. The land that had been above the tide fell below it, permanently and instantaneously, in the seconds of the rupture. Salt water flooded the root systems. The trees died in place. They have been standing there for 326 years. Buried beneath the mud around them, sediment cores reveal the sharp boundary, dark organic peat on the bottom, then a thin layer of pale tsunami sand above it, then more peat. The boundary between those layers is the 1700 earthquake in physical form. The paleoseismic record shows that what happened in 1700 was not exceptional. At least 19 similar earthquakes, all magnitude 8 or above, have occurred on the Cascadia Subduction Zone in the past 10,000 years. Some of them were partial ruptures of the southern section. Several were full margin events, rupturing the entire 1,300-kilometer fault simultaneously. The recurrence interval varies by segment, but across the whole system it averages roughly 500 years, with individual events separated by anywhere from 200 to 1,000 years. Time-dependent probability modeling published in 2025 estimates a 30% chance of a magnitude 8 or greater earthquake in southern Cascadia in the next 50 years, and a 15% chance of a full margin magnitude 9 across the entire fault. 1 in 7. That is the probability that the Cascadia Subduction Zone produces a magnitude 9 earthquake in the next 50 years. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake was a full margin M9.0 subduction event on a comparable fault. Japan had built seawalls. It had a national earthquake early warning system. It had been preparing for that earthquake for decades, and it still killed nearly 20,000 people and cost several $100 billion in damage. The Pacific Northwest is not Japan. When a full Cascadia rupture occurs, it will begin offshore and proceed along the fault in a rupture that may last several minutes. During that time, the entire coast of Oregon and Washington will experience shaking between magnitude 8.5 and 9.0 that researchers describe as sustained ground motion, unlike anything the region has previously produced in its recorded history. Buildings not designed for seismic loading, and there are many, because Oregon and Washington have only required seismic design standards relatively recently, will fail. The Willamette Valley, where more than half of Oregon's population lives, is underlain by soft river sediments that amplify and prolong ground motion above what bedrock alone would produce. 18% of western Washington's road network, 2,755 kilometers, has been predicted to become unavailable due to liquefaction alone, based on U.S. Department of Homeland Security modeling. And then, between 15 and 30 minutes after the shaking begins, the tsunami arrives on the coast. The 800,000 people who live in what scientists call the tsunami inundation zone, the flat coastal areas between the ocean and the terrain that rises inland, will have that window. Not an hour, not 45 minutes. The communities that sit on the Oregon and Washington coast, Seaside, Astoria, Lincoln City, Newport, Westport, Aberdeen, are geographically situated with the Pacific Ocean on one side and the Coast Range on the other. Getting to elevation means getting across low ground first. Kenneth Murphy, FEMA's Earthquake and Tsunami Program Manager for Region 10, publicly stated that his operating assumption was that everything west of Interstate 5 would be toast. The Oregon Resilience Plan, produced in 2013 at the direction of the Oregon legislature, estimated up to $32 billion in economic damage in Oregon alone. Electrical services on the coast could be out for up to 6 months. The bridge systems connecting coastal communities to the interior, built on river sediments, over waterways that will experience dramatic wave action, are not built to post-earthquake standards in most cases. The plan's conclusion, in plain terms, was that the Oregon coast would be effectively isolated from the rest of the state for an extended period after a full Cascadia rupture. Seattle, 60 miles east of the coast and on the shores of Puget Sound, will not face a direct ocean tsunami, but 3 to 5 minutes of magnitude 8.5 to 9.0 shaking from the offshore rupture will arrive before any significant warning is possible. The floating bridges of Lake Washington, engineering marvels that rest on hollow concrete pontoons, are designed to flex in shaking but have documented vulnerabilities to very long-period ground motion. South Seattle, where the ground transitions from solid bedrock to the soft fill of former tide flats, is a priority liquefaction concern for engineers who have modeled the event. The city is not unprepared. Retrofitting has happened, new buildings meet modern seismic codes, but its critical infrastructure was built across a wide range of eras and standards, and a M9.0 will test all of them simultaneously. Every 14 months, something called an episodic tremor and slip event passes along the Cascadia Fault. These slow slip events, detected by GPS networks and seismometers as a gentle, aseismic creep that takes days to weeks, are not earthquakes in the felt sense. They do not shake buildings, but they transfer stress from one part of the fault to another, and in doing so, they load the locked zone, the part that has not moved since 1700, with incrementally more accumulated pressure. A 2021 coalescing slow slip event along Cascadia's northern section showed behavior that researchers noted as unusual, producing a secondary acceleration of the slip front that some scientists are now studying as a potential indicator of how the fault approaches its breaking threshold. The 1700 rupture sent a tsunami to Japan. The Japanese Tsunami Archive allowed scientists to date the earthquake that produced it to within a few hours. The same precision has since identified predecessors going back thousands of years, each leaving its signature in coastal marsh sediments, buried sand sheets, and drowned forests. The pattern is clear, the interval is variable, and the current interval, 326 years, is well within the range of what has historically preceded the next rupture. There are 3 signals that geoscientists study as potential indicators of where the Cascadia system stands in its cycle. The first is the spatial pattern of slow slip events. The locked zone where stress accumulates sits just offshore. The slow slip occurs deeper on the fault, landward of the locked zone. Changes in the pattern of slow slip, in frequency, location, or magnitude, may reflect changes in stress distribution on the fault interface above it. The second is the offshore deformation signal. The most direct measurement of accumulated strain comes from GPS networks and seafloor pressure sensors tracking movement above the locked zone. The Juan de Fuca plate is being dragged down at 4 centimeters per year, warping the land above it downward and landward. In 1700, that land sprang back 1 to 3 meters in an instant. The current measurements confirm the fault is still fully locked and accumulating strain. What they cannot confirm is exactly when that strain will release. The third signal is the one that would make this a breaking news story rather than a background geological concern: a significant magnitude earthquake on or near the locked zone offshore. The Cascadia interface itself has produced very few detectable earthquakes since 1700. That quiet is itself the evidence of locking. A fault that is not slipping does not produce small earthquakes. If that seismic quiet were to break, if the offshore zone began producing detectable earthquakes in the zone where the two plates are in contact, it could indicate that the locked interface is beginning to fracture. That would be the signal that the next Cascadia earthquake was not centuries away, but potentially much closer. 326 years of accumulated stress, 4 centimeters per year, 7 million people in the impact zone, 15 to 30 minutes of warning for the coast, and a FEMA director who said, when asked what happens when the fault finally ruptures, that everything west of E5 would be toast. The record says it will happen. The physics says it will happen. The question that no instrument can currently answer is when. Subscribe to stay ahead of what's coming.